come forwards, please. Oh, it's better, yeah. We want to be close and engaged and warm. So while we're all moving, I'd like to introduce Jen. She's one of our newest MVPs. So upstanding and a round of applause. And we are running right on time, so let's get started.
All right, we're way behind. Sit down. All right. So welcome, and thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to be here. This is my first Codegarden. As was mentioned, my name is Jen Wolke, or Wolke for the German speakers in the audience, who will notice that my last name actually means cloud. Sadly, cloud is only my second favorite thing about Umbraco. My first favorite is document type composition, but that's harder to fit on business cards, so we'll just go with Wolke. I am a solution lead at a digital agency called Blue Modus, based in the United States, also an Umbraco Platinum partner. I've been working with Umbraco since 2021. For anyone who likes eye-roll-worthy puns, it was love at first website. For everybody else, I apologize. That should be my last bad joke for the next 30 minutes or so. I'll try to speed up a little because we've got stuff to cover. So today, I'd like to talk about one of my favorite Umbraco projects so far. We'll talk about the who, what, when, where, why, and how. The site isn't very flashy or very complex. The design's really basic, which we'll touch on, but was at the client's request. They had some very specific requirements about the look and feel. So not super flashy, but there were two things that really made the project exciting for me. And the first was just the overall value that the project provided to the content editors and the client. And the second was that the development team got to use some Umbraco features and extension points that we don't use every day. So we got to do things a little bit differently, and it's always exciting when you get to do something new. This particular project enables a group of content editors to create and manage a bunch of micro websites. As a side note, for confidentiality reasons, these screenshots are not from the actual site, which will be pretty obvious. We did not build a spoonful of sugar bakery site, unfortunately. But it is cloned from the original project, so all the functionality is the same, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent. So we'll start off with who. Who is the project for? Sorry. The client is a very large organization which builds and maintains hundreds of websites for external customers. Like I said, they're microsites. Each one is really small. They've got less than a dozen pages, but they do each have their own custom domain. And they follow a very consistent, repeatable format. They're very templated. And the sites are maintained by non-technical users who are each responsible for handling many sites. They're generally copying and pasting from Word, Shutter. I know that always goes really well in a CMS, right, when you copy from Word, but that's pretty much how they were used to operating. So what was the problem we were trying to solve? In addition to creating and maintaining these individual sites, the team also needs to maintain global content that gets used across all the sites. And they also need to be able to configure some technical aspects for each of those individual sites, such as the robots.txt and the Google Tag Manager container. And they also need to be able to kind of launch quickly when their client is ready, so they don't want to have to wait around on the IT team to finish setting things up. Prior to this project, the team was using an in-house developed CMS. Anybody else ever tried to build their own CMS? Always also goes well. Along with some custom-built web pages, some .NET web forms, and additionally, each site was running in its own app service and app plan in Azure, which obviously was super cheap, right? That doesn't add up quickly when you've got 500 sites. When am I going to get the good stuff? Soon. Mostly this slide's here because I needed a when, so here it is. Also, lunch is at 12:30 for anybody else who, like me, skipped breakfast, and it is right outside in the social space. Sleep won out over food this morning. Where was the site built? Obviously, since we're here at Codegarden, it was built using our favorite friendly CMS, specifically version 10. We started this before 13 was out. In a perfect world, we would have used Umbraco Cloud, but there is a limitation to the number of custom domains you can use when using cloud. It's either 50 or 100, depending on whether you're on the starter plan or the standard plan. Since they've got well over 100, that wasn't going to work. We considered enterprise level, but that just got to be cost prohibitive. It was going to be cheaper to host our own at that point. We did also consider Hardcore briefly, and then just add some kind of a front-end framework on top of it. But we needed to do a lot of custom coding for the APIs that Hardcore just didn't really lend itself to. Additionally, the client insisted on some additional redundancy and failover. So given all of that, self-hosting in Azure ended up making the most sense. Why was the site built? As we talked about, they had a lot of custom development previously, so really the goal was to minimize that, get these sites built faster so that somebody's not going in there and building a bunch of HTML pages and building custom forms, just removing that reliance on the technical team to give the content editors a little bit more independence and control, and also it freed up the technical team to focus in other areas so they could work on other initiatives within the organization. Another one of the big goals was to improve the editing experience. Sounds like a lot of people have built their own CMS. It's always really hard to keep up with what your clients need or your end users. And the CMS just hadn't been updated, hadn't kept up. So we were able to leverage Umbraco's ease of use to really simplify and streamline the editing process. One of the editors, when we were doing the training, said, "I've never built a website before, but you made it really easy," which was great to hear, because that was our goal, was to make it really easy for them to just stand up these really simple sites. Some of the other benefits, as I mentioned, they were using individual app services before, so we basically combined everything into one application now with a lot of sites within that one Umbraco instance, so saved a ton of money, because now we've only got one app service. Granted, it's much larger than any of those individual ones, but still saved money. It also resulted in improved site stability and better performance, just because we were able to scale that one app service really well, rather than having to kind of nickel and dime those little ones and try to get them to squeeze every last ounce of performance out of them. All right. So if you're still with me, let's move on to the good stuff. How we actually used Umbraco to empower the content editors. Some of the things that we did to make the CMS editing experience as straightforward as possible. We customized some of the routing to handle all the custom domains. We added an environment banner, clearly identifying each environment. We provided a set of themes for the content editors to use to get a little bit of control over the look and feel. We also created a content structure which would allow them to manage both global and site-specific content in what hopefully we've found an intuitive way to do that. We also used the SEO toolkit with some customizations, and we made use of user permissions to kind of really limit access to content, not only to protect it, but to make sure that people were only seeing what they need to see, so they don't get overwhelmed by the amount of information in there. So first up, let's talk about domains and routing. So this is a tech conference, so every presentation is legally required to have some code. So here is my obligatory code snippet. It was important to the client that each of the microsites be able to be viewed and sent out for preview before the custom domains were in place, which normally wouldn't be a problem. You've got your nodes in the tree, you just go over to the info tab, click the URL. But the problem was that this spoonful of sugar and the pop soda shop, it was late. That's about as creative as I get in naming. Hardest thing in programming is naming, right? So typically that wouldn't be a problem, but that node isn't actually a page, it's just a container. So we added this code on the right to basically say, if you access this node, it just kicks you to the first child page, which if they've organized their content the way they're supposed to, it will take you to the home page. All right, so next up is one of my favorite features of the site. It's such a simple thing, but it ended up being really helpful. So has anybody else ever been updating content and just not been able to figure out why you're not seeing the changes on the website? No? Just me? And you realize you were in the wrong environment? Just me? All right. You don't have to admit it. It's fine. Even if this hasn't happened to you, the environment banner can still be really helpful. As you can see, we've got different banners in different colors for the different environments. It only appears in the non-production environments. But just by adding that, everybody knows where they are. It's like, hey, you're in dev, you're debugging in dev, you're editing in dev. And it just was so helpful. We like this so much, we're actually gonna steal it and put it in our starter kit. It might even show up as a package in the marketplace. Keep an eye out for that, because it was kind of just an aha moment, like, why am I not doing this everywhere? We even want to add a little bit of enhancement and make it so when you hover over it tells you like the name of the database you're connected to, things like that, so you don't have to, or the version, because you've got multiple projects, you can never remember which version, which client's on. So we want to add some of those. Another one of my favorite things are the microsite themes that we added. Again, the site's not super complicated. Obviously, the themes are not drastic, but it just gives the editors just a little bit of freedom. But the bigger thing that this did is it standardized a lot. Before everybody was custom coding everything, you never knew what it was going to look like, and the organization didn't really want that. They wanted every sites to look fairly consistent, to be very professional and well organized. So by adding the themes, we kind of reined that in a little bit. And I was really impressed with what our front end team came up with. They didn't have a lot to work with because the sites were pretty basic. Honestly, they were pretty boring. So they really got a lot out of that. So I was really excited with the way this turned out. All right. So content structure. Now let's get into the really good stuff, since we're all here to talk about a content management system. So as I mentioned, we've got global content as well as content specific to each of the sites. So with as many sites as they've got, obviously you want a place to manage that centrally. There's a couple of different types of global content. We've got full pages, such as the privacy policy and the error page. But then we've also got, in the global site settings, a couple of just code snippets that can get repeated. I think I can assume that no one here really needs to see a privacy policy or an error page, so I'm just going to skip past that one. If we look at the global site settings, we've got configurations for cookie consent and a block of text that goes at the bottom. It's used as a legal disclaimer in the real world example. But the cookie consent, in addition to giving them the ability to configure the text, we also gave them a little bit of ability to configure whether it has one or two buttons and just kind of how it behaves, so that they don't have to go back to the development team and say, hey, we really need it to have two buttons, we need to have an accept and reject, and we just kind of built all the functionality around that in, so that if they change their mind later, or privacy laws change and they need to adjust, they can do that without having to go back to the dev team. All right. So next up, we'll get into kind of how the content is organized for the actual individual sites themselves. It's funny, as developers, we say we love change, but I think that we're as resistant to change as anyone else, and that includes me. Months later, I'm still really annoyed that Microsoft moved the connection strings in Azure. Still can't find them. I don't know why. It's been months. Typically, when I approach modeling and organizing content, I try to reuse as much as possible. My mantra might as well be reduce, reuse, refactor, right? Heavy emphasis on the reuse. I want to reuse everything I can. I don't know if anybody else identifies with this, but that's just kind of, I'm lazy as a developer. I want to reuse as much as I can. But in one of the early sessions during the discovery of this project, one of the client team members said, we don't need to be able to reuse content within the microsites. And I couldn't wrap my head around that. I was like, what? No, that can't be right. I thought, maybe they just mean they don't want to reuse it between the sites, which makes sense. They're independent sites. But fortunately, that's the whole point of discovery, is to talk to the client, really understand what they need. And we had really good discussions around it, and the light bulb finally went off. I was like, oh, okay, I finally hear you. I understand what you're saying. I understand the nature of these sites now. And building out this content model ended up being one of the most fun parts of the project once I kind of got past my typical way of thinking and kind of got outside my comfort zone. It was something new and different, so I got to, I had a lot of fun with that part. We eventually landed on 5 types of content. We've got general details, which we see on this screen, global elements, technical configuration, structured content, and pages. So on this page, we're looking at the details, which is just basic site information. Most of this is actually used internally and to create a listing page in another application. So none of this, other than maybe the site name, shows up on the site. In terms of global elements, it's pretty self-explanatory. You've got logos, icons for header and footer, some other header and footer configuration. Because these sites are so simple, we opted to make the navigation dynamic just to make things even easier on the content editor. They don't have to worry about setting up their main nav. That all gets derived from the content tree, including the order. And then on each of the individual pages, there's a field where they can set what they want to display in the menu. So that's the global elements. Next, we've got a little bit of technical configuration for the robots and Google Tag Manager. Obviously, that's not a real Google Tag Manager code, but that's an example. We'll talk more about these little lock icons in a little bit. And now we get into the structured content, which, as you can see, we've got the important dates, the documents, contacts, alerts, frequently asked questions. Structured content can be referred to as different things. So for me, structured content is content that's not just WYSIWYG content. You know, it's got a prescribed pattern. It's got multiple fields that you enter rather than just a big block of text. So just content that has more than one property. Such as the FAQ that you see there. My naming is bad because I renamed it. So instead of title and description, you would probably have question and answer. Okay. So in terms of pages, there's only one page type, just to keep things simple. No decisions to make. So just got one page type, and you've got 2 sections for rich text, and then 3 sections where you can add in blocks that use that structured content. All right. So in terms of content blocks, we've got 3 types. We've got global content blocks, nested content blocks, and related. Obviously, the global ones reference text that was set up in that global site settings, and then nested content, you edit the content of that block directly inline in the block, and then the related blocks reference content in that structured content area. So with the global content block, it can be used to place anywhere on the page another kind of legal disclaimer type text, but it doesn't always have to be right there at the top of the footer. So we put that in a block so they can move it around and they can put it anywhere they want within one of those page sections. Excuse me, and then they can just drag it around, and as long as you're not in 14 yet, you can copy and paste it. So then when looking at the nested content blocks, these allow you to configure directly inline. So like the feature banner, so we've got 3 of these, the section header, the feature banner, the link list, and you can set up that directly when you add the block to the page. Feature banner is a good example. In a lot of sites, the feature banner would be reusable, but again, because of the nature of these sites, this is where we ended up based on the client's needs. And then next we have the related content blocks, which are the ones that I think are the most interesting. We've got 5 of those, which coincidentally is the number of tabs we had in the microsite top-level node. And these blocks reference content from that area. In the case of the FAQ list, you can configure a couple of different things about it, but ultimately you just get the list of FAQs that were in there. What I didn't show is that within that FAQ list, in addition to adding a question with an answer, you can also add kind of a a subheader, so you can put that in this list on the bottom right if you want to be able to break up your frequently asked questions into multiple sections. One thing to note is that we could have just done nested content for all of this, but this was a situation where the infinite editing of Umbraco actually worked against us because it just got to be an overwhelming number of clicks to get through everything. So we unnested, if that's a word, some of the more complicated content and moved it into those tabs as structured content, just to make it a little cleaner and easier on the content editors, because we were like, it's taken way too many clicks to get down to this content. So the next thing I want to talk about, moving on from the content, is the SEO toolkit. If you haven't used this package, I can't recommend it enough. It's fantastic. It's out in the marketplace. It's free. It's the first thing I add when I create a project from scratch, and it's in our starter kit. It just has so many great features. Obviously, I'm not going to get into all of them. We had previously used this package on a lot of projects, but this was our first time extending it, and as with all things Umbraco, it was super easy. We were able to use the sitemap just out of the box. This was a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting that because we had the multiple domains. We were like, oh, we're probably going to have to modify this. It just worked, so it's already set up. If you've got multiple domains, it'll give you a sitemap per domain, so per node. It's fantastic. The one thing we did have to modify was the robots. As you can see, it basically says this was our workaround, this was our cheat. This was the easy way of saying, don't edit robots here because this is more of a global robots, so we added the robots field in the configuration so it picks up the robots.txt for each individual site. And the last area that we focused on was user permissions. Obviously, there's lots of ability built in to create user groups and things like that to really lock down the content. Again, this helps content editors not get confused by things that aren't relevant to them. But one thing we wanted to be able to do was still store that configuration information with all of the other information about the site, but we didn't want content editors to be able to get to it. So we used this admin-only property package, which I think Lottie Pitcher wrote. It's another really great package. This was the first time we had needed to use it, but it lets you restrict individual fields to a group of users or multiple groups. Admin only in the name is a little misleading because you can actually do any group you want. It doesn't have to be administrators. So if we look at the top two, you can see what an administrator would see when they log in and are looking at those tabs, and then a content editor, which is nothing because there are no properties available to them, so the whole tab goes away, which I actually wasn't expecting it. It just happened. I was like, oh, I don't have to put any comments on this tab that says if there's nothing here, it's not for you. So again, really, really great package. So looking ahead, what else could you do with this? We've already seen that we could maybe apply this to some of these other situations, organizations with multiple departments, multiple locations, subsidiaries, or those cases where you end up with the marketing team that says, I need a one-page site for this, and they can just kind of spin them up themselves without having to come to you every time and say, can you build me something for this? Maybe you guys, as you're sitting here, have thought of some other ones, so just lots of applications for this. I do want to call out the awesome project team at Blue Modus in case they happen to watch this, because this is really the team that got everything done. They're incredibly talented people, did a fantastic job, love working with them, so just wanted to give them some kudos on a job well done. And that's what I've got. If you have any questions.